Multistory invited me up to the Black Country. I remember driving around the Black Country, and I remember feeling, how could I possibly connect to the Black Country? The surfaces didn't invite me in. And in fact, I think that's maybe the key word. It's not just an invitation to come, it's feeling invited in, not only by Multistory, but some aspect of what I could see in the Black Country that would sustain me here. I did a little more research online from far away in New York, and one of the things that I read about really did strike me. So 6 or 8 months later, the second trip, I came back more targeted to try and understand what was happening around the issue of domestic violence in the Black Country. It was both surprising to read about and intriguing to see how could I, in a different way than I had previously, visualize some aspect of this issue. The second trip was very intense, meeting a lot of people, sitting in a lot of meetings, going to various locations, and until I walked into this one particular refuge where there was a resource room that was very warm, did I feel that invitation. And the invitation was to come and to come back and to think about making something together. What I think is key is having a feeling there's something to follow or there's something to immerse myself in. And I think entering the refuge where there was the warmth of these walls and a new director who was very open to a dialogue, who didn't know exactly what we had in mind, having the Black Country Women's Magazine in my hand, which Martin Parr had produced with Multistory, gave her an idea, and she definitely leapt at it and said, we'd love to do that. We really moved very quickly into a concept of how to create an environment which would also welcome the women to participate if they were so interested. And that, I think, is the next real step. The workshops then were organized, and I think with Multistory, again, working with a local organization made it possible to branch out beyond just what was I going to do as a photographer, but was there a community that could come together in this project? And so the workshop model, in my mind, invited an illustrator, Sarah, a writer, Emma, a series of cooks, who I didn't know existed, but of course that setting was perfect to then open up this beginning process of women coming forward, not on camera by any means, but coming to sit around the table together. The workshops were hosted in the Resource Center, which means that the women came from various refuges to the Resource Center either in the morning or the afternoon, and then we went to certain refuges in the evening, and that led to a second stage of really working in the refuges. That's a key moment. Stories started to come forward just after a workshop session would end and before someone was going back to their shelter. And I very specifically remember Anne, for example, beginning to tell her story. She urgently wanted to tell a story. I think one of the workshops that was so helpful to her was actually mapping her story and literally drawing a life map on a paper, which Emma did with her, listening to her story. So those were new kinds of interactions with the women. And then they began to tell stories about why particular objects were so important to them. So we were kind of getting a feeling of engagement through the workshops. I think it's really towards the end of that first trip that when we were in a refuge at night, I dared to ask one woman, when the workshop was over, she was going back down the hall, and I just said, could I come and see your room? And that was a big transition, because really seeing the room without her present, with the possessions, the few things she had in that room, suddenly I realized this is a portrait of a woman coming from the stress of their past into a space with nothing, having to create a new life progressively, that these spaces were really like mirrors of their lives. And so that was the moment of a kind of recognition for me about how I could start to visualize or create a visual environment photographically for what we were hearing from them. We shift from this idea of a magazine to making a book, and the interviewing becomes more important. So that second stage is really trying to see how rich storytelling can be from them, how much they will give and share, exchange. Someone like Tilak, who was still living and the longest term resident at that time, and Priscilla, who really had moved out of refuge before we met her, and was working as a mentor to women who were still in the refuge, and one or two others who came, floated in and out, who became our unofficial editorial team. A couple of other mentors participated, but those two women really engaged in the process differently. They were excited by that opportunity.
Music has played a really important part in my life. Drawings have played a very important part in my life. Writing, constantly writing. I think writing works better than counseling. When you're writing your own emotions and reading it over and over and over again, and then it changes. So I think we all have that. It's just we need that one ray of light or somebody to come and, polish those skills a bit.
The way that we felt, we were women with lots of emotions bottled in from so much that has gone on. And the workshops allowed us to understand that there's so much more to us. The workshops helped me find me.
So that set a framework, and we started to get a sense of the look and the feel of what we were making all together. No one would be identified and no place would be identified. That's very important to say, and it's also important to find a solution around. I mean, obviously that's limiting if you can't just freely float and capture, which is really the way I work. I don't construct reality, I capture what I can. So, and not having any action. Action is interesting, or interaction, that's something that has been, I would say, the strength of some of what I've been able to do in the past. So those were limitations set that were understood and appropriate. And so I had to find a strategy in and around that. In the kitchen, where many women might come and go, that, for example, with Claire and her family, that they are making this very elaborate, meal for 7 children, which seemed impossible to imagine how she could even manage the children, not to mention making multiple meals every day. She's just doing what she does, and we capture this kind of amazing moment where she's not serving the children, but she's preparing the plates for 7 children with one under her arm and her eldest son beside her. But difficult to work in communal space where you can't manage all the relationships and avoid revealing anybody.
I look at this drawing and I know it's like a raging fire. But it's not a raging fire. It's me surviving. Me realising that there's such a deep-rooted fire within me that I must survive, I have to survive. And when I'm so deep-rooted in such a beautiful fire, it's not a horrible fire, it's not going to hurt anyone. It's there to be kind, it's there to be gentle, and it's there to grow. It's there to flourish and blossom, and it's there to be seen. And I'd realised that the fire in me had to be shared. So I had to allow the fire that's within me, which is deep-rooted, to be expressed. That's what this tree meant to me.
I think when we shifted from a magazine form to a book, I sensed that the real story, the arch, the journey, was what would create this movement through the book. So it would start with as little as the emergency room offers, which is a lot, in fact, a bed and a room and a safe zone, and the layers of protection that also, the surveillance cameras both looking outward and inward. And then I wanted to really give a feeling for the psychological shift from needing that level of protection to then reestablishing progressively a life that leads a woman out. There are some women who feel comfortable enough with me to be present in their rooms almost on the shift point that they're going to leave the refuge. And then a few leave and are fully present in their rooms. And we know some of those women come back and mentor. So that the rippling out back into society seem to me to be, even though some of them, of course, do return to their relationships, some of them move on into new communities. So that was part of the structure and the vision for the book. There's very little that's said initially. There's a tension in the little that they share, and then you get to Tilak, who's really at the heart of the book, who has given the most when she shares her diary with us and allows us to publish several pages of the diary. I felt like that gesture, both from Tilak to us, that we needed to see the diary. We can't all read the Farsi, so we don't know what she's processing herself, but it's an invitation to any woman to think about the issues of power that they might be confronting themselves. So that, for me, is also another, the ripple out to women who may never be in a refuge and feel they need to be in a refuge, but the questions that women are facing in refuge are shared. Then the question was, so now what are we doing with this object, this thing, this book? But the meaningful moment was really bringing it back to the refuge and to the women in whose hands it might be the most meaningful. So Tilak holding the book in her hands was probably the moment that I cherish, the most. That was kind of extraordinary, her desperately trying to find herself in the book. Flip, 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 flip. That was a fantastic moment.
Okay, Tilak. Oh, I like Saigu. Susan gave me the book, and I just whizzed through the book, and I was going to find myself in the back. I actually didn't think I would have 4 to 6 sheets in the book, and I'm actually right in the middle of it. And there was so much to actually pick from different pages, and seeing myself sitting in that window where, Susan came and she clicked that shot. It just took me back in the memories, what I was going through and how this whole journey has helped me.
Tilak, who I believed from the minute I started talking to her should be doing a biography of her experience, because she truly is gifted. And if she just gets a little more confidence and support to do that, that would really even go beyond what I ever imagined that we could do together. That would be the next stage, and should it live on in whatever ways it can. Then we had this conversation that what do we do and how do we participate in this period known as the 16 Days of Activism for gender violence, not only against women.
16 Days of Activism is going on at the moment. For those of you who don't know what it is, it's a period of time where we're calling people to action to end violence against women and girls across the world.
And compress it as if it's only one kind of narrative. I guess I'm thinking about how, it was very complicated about one thing that happened in the process.
That my heartbeat needed to dance to somebody else's tune.
One of the things I'm going to do is integrate A Room of Their Own, not just as a book on a shelf, but in an installation I'm doing about my own work for decades. There will be a room of their own. And this time, instead of it as being still photographs on a wall, I've really chosen to integrate the voice as text scrolling visually across these landscapes. And that also will be in the indoor market this weekend, but it will also be at the Jeu de Paume in Paris as part of my kind of progressive life, hopefully not the past, but the ongoing future of trying to create form and give form to stories. What happens? Will people bring things for the refuge through the kinds of initiated ideas of the possibility of doing such a thing in an indoor market. Here we are in the neighborhood of the refuges that we know exist around us.
We've come together at West Bromwich Market, and we're doing a series of workshops that are about making and about raising awareness.
Really great to see the book in a public space like this, and to get people sort of intrigued and interested in what we're doing, what we did.
My workshop today was a slogan tote bag workshop, and we were making tote bags covered with text, and they kind of act as these little adverts, I suppose, for the project, and also just things to raise awareness about domestic abuse.
The real challenge is not just making photographs that reflect the lives in an honest way, but can we engage people in a meaningful way to also act, not just have the consciousness, the awareness, but what do they do? What can they contribute? And can we unleash that as a response to the work?